All right. Today on the Show Me the Data podcast, we are super excited to have Harmony from Outreach.io, I think the leading sales engagement platform, as a small plug. Harmony, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, chatting about demand gen, field marketing. I'm excited to go through all the questions.
Yeah. So today specifically, and something that's, I think you're not in a unique spot, but something that's really interesting given the current times, is transitioning your field marketing team to be digital first. And so today we're going to walk through the amount of events that you were doing prior and how that's transitioned and kind of the stats that you're seeing and how it's impacting pipeline. So I guess before we dive into some of the numbers, give us some context, historically about how many events the team would be doing in the field.
Yeah, so field marketing is about a year and a half old here at Outreach, so it's still relatively new. But last year we did almost 225 events, which is pretty outrageous if you consider us, we're a pretty small, young company. And that ranged everywhere from large, sponsorships of conferences to partner events, and then to small like lunch and learns in each region.
Yeah, that is, when you think about it, probably outdoes the number of working days in a year, and I'm sure the math is pretty close there.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, we were doing so much testing, just seeing what worked and what didn't. And then at one point we got feedback from our sales team saying, we just don't have enough time in the day to sell now. So you guys are going to have to take a little bit of a step back on the sheer quantity of events you're planning. But it was highly successful for us. So it was good.
That's awesome. And so give us some context around the pipeline. Like last year, looking back at it, and as you planned for 2020, what percentage of pipeline were you expecting to come from field marketing?
Yeah, so field marketing sits under demand gen overall. So we look at pipeline based on what it field drives and then what our core demand engine drives. And then we break up core between ABM and just, generic demand gen. But the first year we had aimed for 15% of demand gen pipeline to be driven by field. And then this year the target was 25%. So we're like, okay, we've kind of got down what's going to work. Now let's drive even more. And this was before COVID hit. And so now it was kind of like starting in March, we're like, oh my gosh, our whole model is broken. All of our events in our field programs and even demand gen is going to change. And so what do we need to do, honestly, to drive the same amount of pipeline, but with a completely different mix of programs?
Yeah. And I think too, as well, and you talk about pipeline, but a big part of event strategy for you is also deal acceleration and helping get deals across the line as well, right?
Yeah. And so our event strategy, or our field strategy in general, we have basically 6 tiers this year. Last year we had 5, but it goes from our first party branded events all the way to, conferences, which is more lead generating, lead focused, all the way down into like 1-to-1 or 1-to-few ABM programs. So honestly, you look at top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and then it's pipe creation, progression, and closing. So we kind of look at all of our events a little bit differently, track them, and plan them differently.
And so when you think about those 6 stages, Harmony, what are the key KPIs that you're looking to drive across them?
Yeah, so ultimately the beginning of the funnel, we're trying to get as many qualified leads to the sales team as we possibly can. So qualified leads and our target personas and our target accounts. So for some of the bigger conferences, it's how many new leads did we drive that converted to MQLs, just, basic top of funnel metric. And then it goes all the way down into, okay, how much pipeline and, how many opportunities are we influencing from some of the smaller 1-to-few or 1-to-1 programs. And then we look at, of course, like of the deals closed, how many field touch points did they have on them? And so we look at, we actually dig so far in where we're manually looking at some of these opportunities and like reading the notes. We're talking to the reps. We're trying to get firsthand, both, quantitative and qualitative data on are our events actually making a difference in a deal or not. So there's just a lot of, it goes all the way from MQL all the way down to, SAL and closed one ultimately.
Got it. And so now that the transition has kind of been forced upon us to go more digital first,
Mhm.
has that changed in the way that you're, number one, actively going after or approaching field market, and then two, on the other side of that, your expectation from the events that you're now doing?
100%, 100%. So, a couple examples of some of the things we've done and how we've gone from in person to virtual is we have a really big industry conference that we host every year. It's almost doubled year over year. And this year we were planning to have 3,000 people in San Diego, which is normally where our conference is, that we had to cancel. And so we pivoted that to a virtual summit, a virtual, conference, and went from having a target of 3,000 to a target of 7,500 to then a stretch goal of 10,000. And then we ended up driving 13,000 people to that. And that was mostly because one, it used to be pretty expensive to go because it was in person. You had to fly there as a destination, to free and virtual. And anyone could then join. There was virtually no barrier to entry. And so that was very surprising. Just generally those numbers, we had no idea that we would ever be able to drive that many registrants and attendees. But when looking at our goals and setting our goals for that, we knew that one, there's going to be a lot of noise. There's going to be other conferences that are virtual at the same time. People are sitting at their desks, so they're probably multitasking. If they have meetings scheduled over, then they're probably not going to attend. So we actually, our assumption was that or we used our webinar conversion rates, attendees and registrants, as an assumption for who would actually attend our virtual event. So it's kind of similar, right? You're still learning, you're presenting something. And so instead of having a 90% attendee rate for in-person, we were expecting during the first week to have a 25% attendee rate, and then we would do on demand after that. So by the end of 3 weeks, we'd have 45% of the registrants actually consume all of our content.
Interesting. And were you able to hit that goal?
Yeah, we were able to hit that goal, but we put so much work into nurtures, post-event follow-up, post-event sequences with outreach, training our sales team and our marketing team, and like all of those programs after is what got us there. When you have in-person conferences, it's like you go for a finite amount of time, and like that's the meat of it.
Right.
You can't really not every company has like recorded sessions you can watch later. And so a lot of people think that like all the work happens up front, but with virtual summits, it doesn't. A lot of work still happens after it ends.
That makes sense. And so when you think about, I guess, breaking kind of your digital programs out, there's the low touch, large scale program from the virtual event, and transitioning from that, the user conference that you have, or the
Yep.
industry conference. And then you mentioned the ABM, or the higher touch point field programs that you're typically running. Have those transitioned over into the digital realm as well?
Yeah, so that's kind of the fun part of what we're doing now, the field part, where we used to take people to basketball games, we would do Topgolfs, we would do dinners at restaurants for some of our target accounts, a lot of those kind of interactive, fun, but intimate events. And so we have been trying to recreate that. So we now have these what we call experiential events that are virtual. And there's a whole bunch of different things we're testing out. Last month, we actually tested one where we hired a celebrity chef. So Stephanie Izard, for all of you Top Chef fans out there, we actually got Stephanie Izard to do a small, intimate virtual cooking class with a lot of our top target accounts, which was really, really fun. I think we had about 20 director plus sales leaders from our target accounts that attended, and we got a ton of great feedback on it. We have one tomorrow actually with a celebrity comedian that's coming in to also do about a 20 to 25 person, ask questions. He'll do some comedy, a lot of kind of an interactive event as well. And then we also just launched a virtual executive book club, which is getting a lot of great traction. We've got, 50 plus sales VPs from our target corporate enterprise accounts that are signed up for that, where we actually bring in celebrity and really famous writers to do a book club, and we send them books. So basically we're just trying to be super creative and think outside the box on how can we get people engaged and have these kind of more intimate conversations, but doing it virtually.
And and I guess going back just a moment ago when you were talking about one of the big things is obviously MQLs and account penetration, but then also pipeline velocity and how quickly people are moving through the funnel. Um,
Yeah.
are you seeing from some of those more high touch programs that they're happening near the bottom of the funnel? Or are those door openers? Um, how are they actually being applied in kind of the funnel
Yeah.
if we were to look at it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So those high touch ones are typically we only include champions and key stakeholders in active opportunities or current customer accounts that have expansion potential. So we know it's like we've already developed a light relationship with these people and we want to make it deeper, right? We want to sell more seats. We want to have bigger deals. We want them to feel welcomed. And so that's certainly pipeline acceleration and closing versus Unleash Virtual Summit, or if we sponsor one of our partner virtual events, that is much more like this really low touch, MQL focused program that maybe could get us a pipe creation, right? An opportunity creation
Mhm.
because it's a new person coming in, but it's much more like top to middle of the funnel for the other ones that are more low touch.
Got it. And so that makes sense, and there's that relationship there, and getting them in person or into that more intimate setting. Now, when you think about comparing the virtual touch point to an in-person touch point, are you treating those the same, or is there less weight when you go back and look at opportunities saying, okay, well, this person we met in person versus this person has been part of a virtual event? Are you looking at those in the same light?
Yeah, so no, we're not actually. We do a bunch of lead scoring, and we score them a lot less. We score them like as if they were a digital touch point, similar to a webinar, more like it. We have learned that generally speaking, an in-person meeting is just not the same as a virtual meeting. It just is not the same, and it won't ever really be the same. I firmly believe that, and our data is also showing that. So although we're able to drive a higher quantity of people that are still really great quality, still the people we want to talk to, you don't make that sincere connection as in virtually as you would in person. So, the velocity of conversions through the funnel is much slower. You expect pipeline to be generated further out versus, within 30 days, you're probably generating pipeline in 90, 120 days.
Mhm.
So it's just a lot different. And you just can't have the same expectations for a virtual event that you would in person. It's just not the same.
Fair. And so with, I guess, expectation shifting, has the budget changed at all, or are you staying just simply reallocated what you would do for in person to digital?
Yeah, no, that's also a really great question. So we cut our budget pretty substantially, and it's not because we necessarily had to, but it's because in-person events are much more expensive. Like you're usually flying people there, you're traveling, you're paying for food, T&E. You've got, especially if we're doing our own hosted events, like we're paying big hotel fees, security, food, all of that. And you don't have that anymore. And event, a sponsor or putting on these virtual events from a technology standpoint too is really low cost as well. Virtual event software is not a heavy lift. So we cut our budget probably in half, and we spend a large majority of that budget on video production. So making sure that our design is good, the content that we're producing that we're either hosting live or on demand is really solid. And that's honestly where most of the cost comes from. Back when we had in-person events, we had very little of that. So it's just shifted a lot of where your budget is being allocated, and you really don't need as much of it.
That makes sense. Now, looking forward, and let's say in a year's time, you're able to have in-person events again. Do you think you'll have that same digital care that you have for the moment with around video production and putting that quality content? Do you think you're going to try and replicate that for your field events once you get back in the field?
Yeah, that's also a really great question. I mean, the great thing about being forced to do virtual programs and to put a little bit more effort into the content that's being produced is that you can reuse it and disseminate it for the entire rest of the year. I mean, in-person, conferences is kind of the same way too, but virtual, it's like it's already a part of the program, right? So you've got it, it's done. Now you can use it and create snackable content forever. And I've learned that will for sure continue to be a priority and a huge benefit of doing virtual. I would say, my mindset has shifted a little bit where I think we're going to have a need to go back to in-person. It's not like virtual programs are going to completely overtake in person. But I have realized that we see the need and we see the impact that virtual events do have. It's, low amount of resources to put it on, lower at least amount of resources to put it on, and you still have a big impact on your funnel. So I think what we'll see, honestly, a year from now is that we'll go back to be doing in-person events with lots of social distancing and health precautions, but then we'll also pair it with virtual as well.
That makes sense. And so, and let's, I guess, drill into some numbers here from a spend perspective. And so when we think about, you mentioned just a moment ago about the additional costs associated with in-person, from getting there to event to the hosting, all of that, which is largely eliminated in a virtual setting. Are you willing to spend the same amount to have a customer or an opportunity attend a virtual event as you would an in-person event? Do you have that same dollar value assigned to it, or is that shifted?
So it's now easier to pull people into virtual events because you don't have very many barriers to entry. And so, in terms of like, we still spend a significant portion of our demand gen budget driving demand for our virtual events. But it's a lot cheaper. So we can do a lot more, honestly, with less. So instead of us driving, it's kind of like the Unleash Summit I mentioned earlier, that instead of spending the same amount driving 3,000 people, we can spend the same amount and drive 13,000 people. Right. So it's honestly cut the costs, cost per lead or cost per registrant significantly, which is a great thing. And so you can honestly, it depends on the event, but you can really open up the floodgates if you want to, or keep them closed and have, smaller, more intimate events, but it's definitely cut the cost down quite a bit.
And as we start to kind of dig into like pipeline generated, and you think about Unleash last year where there was 3,000 versus the virtual event this year, is the pipeline generated going to be similar? Can you get into some of those stats and what you're seeing from, you mentioned the engagement metrics was very high across people engaging with the content. But are you seeing the same amount of pipeline generated from in-person versus the virtual?
No, and we're not. And the reason behind that really is like our in-person conferences, we schedule executive meetings, like exec to exec. We put our reps in front of our top target accounts and have meetings during the conference, like lunches, things like that. That did not happen at the virtual event. So you basically, what we're seeing now is that it's taking us a lot longer to generate pipeline. We still are. We're generating probably 75% of where we were at or where we expected to be for if it was in person. And it's also taking longer. So instead of generating, 100% of the pipeline goal in the first 30 days, we're generating it much further out. So that's something to consider, is just, it goes back to how much do you weight each type of touch point and how much value do you put on that? And what we're seeing all the way down the funnel is that it's not the same as in person. It's not the same as these one-to-one, sales conversations. You gotta expect that, and you have to do more from a follow-up and a nurturing and a sales management standpoint to make sure you can still drive pipeline.
Yep. And just in terms of, and I know this may be putting you on the spot, Harmony, so I apologize in advance, but have you thought about just the current economic situation being a driving factor in that? Last year, if you were to look at the numbers, it would be in person would win versus this year with digital. Have you thought about what difference it could be, or I guess around the other facets of the business where you're seeing velocity Are those numbers still the same, or is it a kind of across the board where you're seeing that impact and it may be that virtual is as effective?
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's also a great question. I mean, it's no surprise that like the market is having a really hard time right now. Companies are, furloughing, laying people off, and it's certainly difficult, right? And I think that every business is being impacted by that, by COVID and by the environment, and we're no exception. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that naturally smaller businesses are being more affected than the larger ones right now. And so that is being reflected in what we're able to drive as well. If you look at each market segment from what we expect events to drive per market segment versus what our virtual events are driving during COVID, it's totally different. So we're still influencing and impacting a lot of pipeline, but we are seeing a decrease in some of the smaller market segments, and we're actually seeing a pretty steady state, if not an increase in some of the upper ones at the moment. And that's partially too because of our business. I mean, we do sales engagement, so we allow you to replicate your best reps, right? We kind of allow you to drive more pipeline with less resources. So it's hard, and I think that's something to certainly consider in this type of environment. Is just it's not, you can't compare apples to apples if you look at last year versus this year.
No, absolutely. So I appreciate you taking that in stride. I know we didn't prepare for that one, so I really appreciate that, Harmony. And thank you for coming on and sharing this with us. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Harmony Anderson from Outreach. Please connect with me, send me a message. I'd love to chat more about this or anything regarding demand gen. I absolutely have my door open.
Awesome. Thanks, Harmony.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed another unfluffy episode of the Show Me the Data podcast. If you want to become part of our community with other demand gen leaders and get exclusive access to Q&As with the guests we have on the show, click the link in the description of the podcast.